For more now, I'm joined by Major General Mick Ryan. He's a retired Australian Army officer and author of War Transformed, the future of 21st century great power competition and conflict. It's good to have you with us, sir. The Russians, a couple of days ago, they announced a corridor for civilians to safely leave Kyiv. And now you've got this 40 mile, 65 kilometre column outside the city. What do you think? Does this look like clearing the city for perhaps a ferocious assault on the capital?
Well, thank you, Michael. And firstly, can I say thank you to you and all the other journalists who are putting yourselves at risk to bring us these stories from the Ukraine. Yes, I think that the Russians have reassessed their campaign over the last couple of days. Their operations in the north and the east have not been that successful. So they are going to double down in combat power. They're going to double down in firepower, and it's going to be a much more ferocious, a much more destructive, and a much more bloody fight from here.
Yeah, I covered the taking of Mosul, or the retaking of Mosul from ISIS in Iraq a few years ago, and other urban campaigns as well. And the fact is they are almost inevitably hard to coordinate. They are bloody, and there is always a huge threat of civilian casualties. And in Ukraine, so many civilians are actually taking up arms to defend their country as well. What could that urban combat look like?
Well, as a soldier, we prefer not to fight in cities because it is the hardest environment in which we can fight for the reasons you just outlined. They're very difficult to command and coordinate. They're very difficult because it's hard to identify friend from foe. And it's the kind of fighting that takes place at very close quarters. Many of the fights in Iraq took place at distances of 10 metres or less. The presence of civilians makes things even more difficult. And in this fight, we are going to see the Russians use more firepower, and there are going to be mass civilian casualties if they do go into Kiev.
It's extraordinary to even hear you say that. We're talking about a European capital. It's just mind-boggling. What is your assessment? You touched on this, but give us more of an assessment of, how Russia has prosecuted this war so far, tactically and so on. Many suggesting overconfidence in how things would go, and they've messed up everything from refueling their own vehicles along the way.
Well, I think the Russians really hoped that surrounding the Ukraine with 190,000 troops would overawe them and coerce them into some political initiatives that would be favourable to Russia. That hasn't happened. I think that surprised the Russians, and quite frankly, the stiff resistance, the amazing bravery by Ukrainian soldiers and civilians has really shocked them. But the Russians have proven in the past they can learn from their mistakes. I think they are learning, and they are now going to double down with more combat forces, more air power, to not just secure Kyiv and other bits of ground, but to sort out problems with logistics, with firepower, with securing the airspace over Ukraine.
I was talking about this with another analyst a couple of hours ago. I'd like your thoughts. I mean, when you look at the David and Goliath aspect of this, it's true, is it not, that a motivated army that is the underdog can often really seriously challenge an under-motivated army. Do you think that's happening here, given the Ukrainians are fighting for their nation, the performance they've put up?
No, I think you're on the mark there, Michael. It's been very clear right from the start that Ukrainians have seized the strategic narrative. I mean, the president's words just the other day, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." I mean, wow, that's electrifying stuff for a nation, for its soldiers and its civilians. And from top to bottom, the Ukrainians have been very effective at mobilising their own people, but also mobilising very quickly a massive international coalition to support them. That has given them a sense of purpose, and they know that the Russians cannot offer them the democracy and freedom that they desire. At the same time, it is not clear that the Russian soldiers that have come across the border in this invasion share a sense of purpose that is anywhere equal to that of the Ukrainian soldiers and civilians.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of them 19-year-old conscripts. We touched on the strategy and the failings of the Russian military so far. That's, if we can call it, the first stage of conventional warfare. We're talking also about a transition to the next stage of urban warfare, which you've addressed, could involve fighting in the city. Perhaps then, if the Ukrainians are overwhelmed, as most analysts think they will be, do you envisage a stage later of resistance or insurgency, given the passion of the people?
Well, I'd caution against too much doom and gloom about what might happen. I mean, we've heard this before. The Ukrainians will fold quickly. That still might happen, but we can't discount that they continue to buy time for a negotiated solution at some point. But if that indeed does happen and the Russians are able to secure a large part of Ukraine, I can't see how the Ukrainians would not continue to resist. They've got form in this. During the Second World War against the Nazis and even against the Soviets after the war, they have had resistance movements before, and I expect that there would be large international support for any kind of insurgency that manifests after any kind of Russian success. I would add, though, Michael, that even if the Russians win tactically, politically, it's hard to see how they can be successful here. They can only win at the cost of massive destruction and massive bloodshed. They'll have 44 million Ukrainians that will hate them.
Yeah, exactly. And quite apart from previous resistance efforts, this is a country where people power has thrown out a couple of pro-Moscow presidents in the past. So you're right, they have form. Major General Mick Ryan, out of time. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to talk to you.
All right.
Stay safe.